Saint Elisabeth, Queen of Portugal. Chapter 1. Parentage of Elisabeth. She is born. Receives the name of Saint Elisabeth, her great-aunt. She is affianced to the King of Portugal, and travels by land to her own kingdom. When a son of Saint Elisabeth of Hungary arrived, one day as a page in the retinue of a certain prince at the court of Queen Blanche, and of her son Saint Louis, neither the king nor the queen, as we are told, could show honour enough to the dear Saint Elisabeth, as she was represented by her youthful son. The queen called him to her, took him by the hand, kissed his brow, made him sit beside her, and spoke to him of his mother. On the present occasion, not a son indeed, but a grandniece of the Saint of Marburg, claims our regard, and all the more powerfully on account of the rarity with which either sanctity or extraordinary intelligence is perpetuated in the blood. 40 years had passed since the holy princess of Thuringia had been taken early to her rest, when another Elizabeth was born, to revive the name and the memory of her who had fallen asleep at Marburg. Andrew, King of Hungary, the father of the elder Saint Elisabeth, had a younger daughter, Violante, by his second marriage, who became the wife of James, King of Aragon, called the Conqueror. Their reign was a fortunate one. The king doubled his possessions by the acquisition of Valenti and the Balearic Islands. He also acquired Murcia, as the price of his assisting King Alfonso of Castile against the Moors. His son Peter, the Infante of Aragon, married Constantia of Sicily, a granddaughter of the Emperor Frederick II, and their youngest child was the second Saint Elisabeth, the subject of this memoir. Her birth occurred in 1271, during the life of her grandfather. Her only sister had already received the name of her grandmother, Violante, the Saint of Hungary, who had been canonized about 40 years before. The parents of our little princess, therefore, thought that they could not do better than keep the name of Elizabeth in the family. So it was given to their little darling, at the font, no doubt with the expectation that her great-aunt would not be forgetful of her in heaven. At the time of her birth, her grandfather, King James, and her father, the Infante Peter, were not on speaking terms. It seems, however, that the old king took a great fancy to his little granddaughter, and predicted that she would surpass all the ladies of the house of Aragon. At the same time he made up his quarrel with his son Peter, and 5 years later finished his long reign, leaving the father of our little princess King of Aragon. She was old enough to remember in later years seeing 2 kings and 3 queens following her grandfather's remains to their place of sepulture at Poblete. When the young Elizabeth was 9 years of age, Alfonso, King of Portugal, dying, was succeeded by his son Dionysius. One of the earliest acts of his reign was to dispatch ambassadors to the court of Aragon to solicit the hand of the Princess Elizabeth as his affianced bride. It so happened that they found ambassadors from 2 other courts arrived on the same errand. Edward I of England wished to secure our young princess for his son, and Charles, King of Sicily, was a suitor on behalf of his son Robert, who afterwards married Violante, the elder sister of Elizabeth. It was with the greatest difficulty that her father could bring himself to part with his little favourite. Her sweetness of disposition was such that he considered her very presence in his house a source of blessing to it, which he could ill spare. Even at this tender age, Elizabeth could not conceal her love of prayer and of almsgiving. State policy and the remonstrances of his counsellors at length compelled her father to make an election for her among her suitors. He determined that a king actually reigning was a more eligible match for his daughter than the heir apparent to a throne. Perhaps, too, the fact that Portugal is the nearest of the 3 kingdoms may have helped him in his decision, as it promised him a better chance of sometimes seeing his beloved child. It seems also that she was related to both the English and the Sicilian princes within the forbidden degrees, and her father declined the expense of procuring a dispensation from Rome. The matter was therefore decided in favour of Dionysius, King of Portugal. It was a barbarous kind of way, no doubt, of disposing of the future happiness of a mere child, but it was the custom of the age, and indeed of much later times, especially among persons of high rank. Nor, after all, are we quite so sure that if things were looked into very narrowly, matches, quite as summarily made, would not be found even now and among persons of very middling rank indeed. The next step in the business was to send away the young queen to the court of her future husband. But now the question arose, how should she be sent? A land journey through a country devastated by war appeared to the Portuguese ambassadors rather too great a risk to run. It was therefore proposed to send the bridal party by sea. On further consideration, this was thought to be decidedly the more dangerous way of the two, so a land journey through Valencia and Castile was resolved upon. The Bishop of Valencia and a company of nobles and knights escorted the young queen and her train of maids of honour and of ladies-in-waiting. Her trousseau was of the costliest description. What became of it we shall see by and by. At a certain point in the journey the king took an affectionate leave of his favourite child. He called himself the most unfortunate of men to be thus robbed of his dearest treasure in life. He blessed her over and over again, adding that he had imparted to her all the advice he had to give, and that in gifts of mind, as well as in disposition and manners, she left him nothing to desire. And so they parted, the little queen continuing her journey, with her maids and her ladies, surrounded by a cavalcade of Aragonese and Catalonian knights. On the confines of Portugal they were met by a brother of King Dionysius, and by another cavalcade of Portuguese nobles and knights, to whom the Aragonese consigned their treasure. At Francoso, King Dionysius was waiting to receive his bride. Their nuptials were celebrated, and a settled provision made for the royal maintenance of the queen. Yet it was barely 11 years since the name of Saint Elisabeth had been given her at the font.